Welcome to Positive Disintegration, a path to authenticity. In this episode, Chris and I talk with Richard Edelman about systems and disintegration. We talk about how we as individuals are connected and what disintegration means in the spaces between our relationships, as a broader society, and as a species on this planet. Richard helps us make the connections between our connections and the theory of positive disintegration. And I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as we did. Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to Positive Disintegration. I'm Emma Nicholson.
I'm Chris Wells.
And Chris, today we're having a guest on who works in a space of blending different things together. And we're going to learn how that relates to positive disintegration.
I can't wait to have this conversation.
For our listeners, our guest, without further ado, is Richard Edelman. And Richard is the founder of Living Arts Wisdom, which is a synthesis of neuroscience, visionary insight, art, evolutionary philosophy, dedicated to nurturing luminous pathfinders in an age of unraveling and renewal. Richard weaves together wisdom from many sources: art, meditative theory, trauma-informed care, jazz improvisation, Tai Chi, interpersonal and cultural neurobiology, the extended evolutionary synthesis, and more practices. And he synthesizes it into living practices that liberate the human spirit and regenerate culture from the inside out. He walks his talk, offering mentorship, courses, and immersive training for those ready to consciously co-create culture during challenging times. Welcome to the podcast, Richard.
Thank you, Emma. Good to be here.
Yeah, welcome, Richard. It's so great to have you with us. You are somebody who I have known would be an excellent guest. And so, no pressure, but I'm excited about this because we got to know each other in the Positive Disintegration Study Group when it existed. And your contributions to our discussions were always so insightful, fascinating, opened my mind to new dimensions with the theory. And so I'm excited to have you here.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Well, and as a listener, we always kick off with how guests came to the theory of positive disintegration. So please share with us your journey to discovering TPD.
Well, I discovered it within the field of gifted study and practice, which is something that I had resisted for years for various reasons. And when taking a second look at it, I fortunately discovered Dąbrowski and the theory of positive disintegration, and it immediately rang a bell. It immediately spoke to me. I could relate it to a number of different passages in my own life. And I'm a person who loves theory, so I just thought, wow, this theory resonates with me. It's really brilliant. And a number of the aspects of it really resonated with me, having to do with emotion and kind of a fresh take on emotion. So it was things like that that drew me to it.
One thing that I'm hoping that we can talk about in our conversation today is interpersonal neurobiology and relationships and positive disintegration, and especially in terms of dynamisms. And so with that in mind, I'm going to open up to you the path we take with this.
Okay. Well, I gather that you're interested in interpersonal neurobiology, and I would think that anybody who's interested in the theory of positive disintegration would be fascinated by interpersonal neurobiology. To me, it's really the leading edge in the field of human psychology and the most deep, comprehensive framework for understanding human life. In that regard, it's grounded in a lot of thought streams that came before, a lot of very well-founded scientific discoveries about the human mind and life. It was organized, I would say, and presented by Dan Siegel, who's a psychiatrist and affiliated with UCLA. Also other contributors to it. There have been actually many contributors to it at this point. Bonnie Badenoch, Alan Shore has done some amazing work in integrating brain science and psychoanalysis, psychotherapy. So it's a very comprehensive and integrative framework for understanding the human mind and life. It basically has a model that connects the mind, the brain and relationships. And all of the theory of it is applicable to practical applications. So you can immediately grab a hold of it and find practical applications, first and foremost in psychotherapy, but also in education and any number of other fields that are related to that. It's very well organized as a framework into different domains, each of which can be applied to human development and growth. So you can see where what I've said so far, how it would integrate with the theory of positive disintegration. One of the links is the centrality of integration in interpersonal neurobiology, which, of course, if you're talking about disintegration, it's good to know about integration. What is it that's disintegrating? And so a lot of that can be found in interpersonal neurobiology. And it's beginning to be expanded in a consilient way with cultural neurobiology linked up with it and with evolutionary theory, which I find very exciting.
Can you kind of say a bit more about what it is for our listeners who are just totally unfamiliar with the term, and maybe also link it to positive disintegration a bit more?
You mean integration?
Exactly, like what's actually happening that's being integrated. I think that we don't usually talk about this aspect of things, from like a physiological perspective or
Mhm.
yeah, so I'm curious.
Well, Dan Siegel broke it down into 8 or 9 different domains. So one of them is consciousness, which is states of consciousness for one thing. There's more states of consciousness than just waking and sleeping, and internal family systems, s- which a lot of people are familiar with, speaks to a lot of different states, self states that can occur. And we go in and out of them all day long, but those can be disintegrated as in dissociative identity disorder as an extreme case of lack of integration of those self states. And then integration of left and right hemispheres of the brain. One of the people who has spoken most beautifully about that is Ian McGilchrist. In books like The Master and His Emissary, talks about the integration of the left and the right hemisphere, and then vertical integration, linking the brain stem and the limbic area to higher cortical regions. So there can be disintegration there. There can be narrative disintegration where people's stories are jumbled and in a state of confusion. Like with IFS, internal family systems, there's different identities that can be disintegrated and at odds in conflict with one another. So there are different domains that if you take a cursory look even at interpersonal neurobiology, 8 or 9 different domains, all of which can be in a state of integration or disintegration. And the integration is wholeness. And so we're talking about the flow of energy and information as an emergent system, being the human mind, that is embodied not only in the brain, but the entire body, and actually beyond that, because one of the foundations of interpersonal neurobiology is what's called 4E cognition. I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but what 4E cognition is basically is simple. It's that we're embodied beings. So our entire body is involved in our cognition, our mind, and we're enacting reality. We're agents actively creating a reality, not passive recipients of experience. And our minds are extended. So if you've dipped into AI, for example, you can see that we've downloaded a lot of times our own thought processes into the cloud and then can retrieve it. So we're in a system of recursive feedback loops that go out now further and further into the universe, and our minds are thereby extended. So this is a whole, not 2.0, maybe 3, 4.0 understanding of the mind that is applicable to the theory of positive disintegration, can be understood within this context in a mutually enriching way. So the theory of positive disintegration can enrich all of these other things that I'm talking about, and they certainly can enrich the theory, and in a way that in science it's called consilience, where the ideas themselves integrate and synergize each other.
Thank you. I mean, Emma, what do you think? My mind is a little exploding right now and I don't even know where to go.
Sometimes I want to synthesize things down into small things, and sometimes I just pull out one little thread. And this is one of those moments where there was something that you said, Richard, about being the co-creators of reality. And I think about that meme that's been going around it that, people like to think about time travel and time travel movies where you go back into the past, you change one small thing and the whole present has shifted. And yet rarely do we stop to think that what we are doing now could radically alter the course of the future. It's a weird paradox that we have as people, is that we think of ourselves as the center of the universe, and this fits in with positive disintegration when Dąbrowski's talking about empathy and subject-object, how we view other individuals as unique human beings. So we think of ourselves often as the center of the universe, but then we think that we have absolutely no agency in the world that we're creating.
Well, it appears as if we do, sidestepping even the issue of free will versus determinism. We sure have agency, and this is, to me, pretty demonstrable. And the whole field of what's called inactivism, which is a way of thinking that a scientist named Francisco Varela developed a number of decades ago, is pretty insightful and pretty liberating the more you understand it, in the light that it sheds on our own minds and our own relationship to the web of life.
I'm so deep right now in working on a book, and it's using my story to bring the theory to life. And one of the things that you know about me, I'm sure, is when I was studying my life at the beginning of working on autoethnography, I wondered what aspects of myself made the difference for me in terms of like coming back from my disintegrations, being a successful graduate student. I mean, I was like a doctoral student at the time. And so I'm like, well, how did I get here from where I was? I was this mental patient. And I assumed that there were going to be like these individual characteristics within me that made the difference, maybe my intelligence. But what I found in my research was that it was several people I had known along the way that made the biggest difference for me. People I considered trusted adults when I was young, who were safe, whose very presence was like medicine to me. And when I was connected with them, we were talking on the phone, when I saw them in person, it's like those were the moments of relief that I had. Those were moments of clarity where I was connected with myself, with them, with having a future. Like those relationships really made the difference for me. And when I discovered interpersonal neurobiology as a thing, it helped make sense of that kind of how important resonance is with other people for somebody like me who has such strong emotional overexcitability, especially. Like it was so critical.
So important. And so for me, just like you were saying, for me, relationship is at the heart of things. And it's also very much a part of interpersonal neurobiology and other frameworks that can be brought into play. We in our culture have been so enculturated into atomizing, siloing, compartmentalizing things. And this is in the field of psychology too. Very much it's focused on the individual. And that's just one way of looking at it, and not necessarily the most fruitful one. And what gets missed over and over again is relationality. And so if you look at us biologically, we have different biological systems, and we like them to be in a state of homeostasis or balance, right? But what we now know is that there's sort of a homeostasis 2.0 called allostasis, which is not only a steady state of balance like homeostasis, but actually is geared up to meet challenges, which is what life is all about. There's a lot of material out there. I can share some of it with you about allostasis and the difference that an understanding of that makes. And relational allostasis is what most of us want in our hearts. And because the theory of positive disintegration is a scientific theory, I'm bringing this up because it provides an understanding of the neurobiology of allostasis, provides a good foundation for the theory itself, and how there can be disintegration and integration and growth, human growth and development and transformation. It's quite liberating to apply this to your own life, because we're all living in relational matrices. And you can see this when you dip into attachment theory, which is one of the thought streams that informs IPNB and interpersonal neurobiology, because attachment theory speaks directly to how we generate, as in early childhood, our relationality, whether we're avoidant, whether we tend to co-create flourishing human connections, all of these different things. And that's just one thought stream that's a part of interpersonal neurobiology that can inform our understanding of relationality. And that how we are now, say, if we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, we think, oh, this is just who we are, but not necessarily so. These may be patterns that we absorbed as small children that don't serve us any longer, and that can disturb our own relationships, the relationships that matter to us. And by understanding this and the therapeutic applications, say, of attachment theory, we can free ourselves of these patterns that no longer serve us and certainly don't serve the people that we care about. And so that's just one avenue through which these different thought streams can be applied to better human life. One thing that I would like to speak to is something that I've discovered for myself, at least, of the fractal nature of the theory of positive disintegration, and that it actually occurs in different levels of life, where the multi-levelness of the theory doesn't just apply to an individual, but it applies to human evolution as well, which is a whole bigger picture than just an individual, say, living in California or Australia or Wisconsin in the 21st century. And the nitty-gritty of it, I guess, we're all aware of climate change, climate chaos, and the possibility of climate collapse even. And, that we're living right now in a polycrisis. And there's a lot of, frankly, trauma that many of us, if not most of us, are experiencing around this. There's now a climate psychology alliance, a climate psychiatry alliance. There's the work of Britt Ray with Generation Dread, who are very eloquent about climate anxiety, climate trauma, and all of the harms that are flowing from the climate disasters that we're living through and all of the attendant disasters going on it. And what we're essentially doing is destroying our biological niche. So we've become an evolutionary mismatch. So this is key to understanding the up-leveling of the theory on a broader scale. Bringing evolution into the picture is, how can I put this without going into the weeds? We're in an evolutionary crisis. What I've done, and I have here, I'm looking at actually added of a graphic that I've developed. It tracks the stages of disintegration, but species-wide, because the task confronting us as a species right now in a very short period of time is we need to transform our functional relationship with our biological niche. If we don't, well, it's already been disastrous. Before we started recording, we were talking about being refugees from climate fires and seeking a place to live that was, if there is such a thing, relatively climate proof. Well, these are the same kind of disturbances that can propel a person from one stage of, not stage, but level, from one level to another. We're so disturbed by our old ways that are not only not living up to our ideals, but they're not viable. They're potentially existentially disastrous. And so this is throwing so many aspects of human existence into confusion, epistemic confusion, like people are so confused about what is true and what isn't. And what are their values and who should they align with? So, I mean, it's pretty obvious when you look at the culture that it's disintegrating right now. And heavily conflicted, talk about ambitendencies, like in the theory of positive disintegration. There are culture-wide ambitendencies. And so it's possible to plot the principles of the different levels across the entire species, because I realize I'm doing a lot of integration of different theoretical material, but it's important to consider what's called the extended evolutionary synthesis, which is not just genetic evolution, but also cultural evolution. And that the culture that we're living in is what I call a deep neuroculture. It's very similar to in a forest where you have the mushroom caps on the forest floor, but beneath that is this whole network that keeps the forest alive. And so it's like a matrix, a neurocultural matrix that we're just the mushrooms of on the surface as human beings. But this whole thing is going on, and it's what generates our biological niche. And that biological niche is itself disintegrating. And it infuses our nervous systems. It lives in the spaces, the intersubjective relational spaces between us. And all of this right now, as part of the climate disaster, is itself disintegrating. So our nervous systems are a part of it. Our nervous systems created the culture that is actually toxifying the planet and threatening its survival. In terms of climate change with fossil fuels and so on, that alone, we thunk that up. We did that. And so now, at least for a lot of people, are taking a look, what have we done? We're not the species that we want to be, which is similar to a person at that level going, I'm not the person that I need to be. I'm not the person that I want to be. And so just like in biological organisms, you start with unicellular organisms and then multicellular organisms. That is a major evolutionary transition. And so there have been many major evolutionary transitions throughout the course of life on the planet. And once in a while, there'll be one that happens very fast. That's called punctuated equilibrium. And that's something to me that I believe that we're in the midst of now, which is a species-wide disintegration, really. And we need to transform the functional relationship to our environment because we've been destroying it. And if that's not dissatisfaction with oneself, I don't know what is. And so that itself speaks to a higher level, a greater scope, if you will, of what Dąbrowski was talking about with the levels of an individual going through the different levels of disintegration. And the outcome is uncertain. We don't know if we're going to go back to just a state of permanent disintegration and a sad fate, or whether we're going to have a positive disintegration as a species. We don't know. I'm doing what I can so that it's a positive disintegration in the end. And that's where my theoretical work and practical work is done. In doing this, I've come up with a term, toxic enculturation, where when we're going through the different developmental stages or levels or both, we're enculturated. We're not just the genes that come into existence when we're born, but we're enculturated. But so there's so much toxic enculturation that we've had where we mistreat each other, we mistreat ourselves, and we're having to disintegrate all of those patterns of toxic enculturation so that we can emerge in a positive way. One of the ways that that shows up is with parents who are cycle breakers. They don't want to pass on the abuse and the oppression and the trauma that has persisted for millennia with multi-generational transmissions of suffering. And so there are a lot of parents who are cycle breakers. And there are a lot of therapists who are wanting to facilitate that, who are very aware of the idea of cycle breaking in that way. And some educators too. I don't think this is a majority, but I think parenting, for example, has sensed what's going on And this is one way that's quite wonderful that it's shown up is parents who don't want to pass on the dysfunctional parenting that they experienced. That is itself, in an everyday way, a way that we can liberate ourselves from toxic enculturation. It's a whole process that I've identified of liberating from toxic enculturation, empowering the soul, empowering the agency that Emma was talking about. And then it's so much easier then with the liberation and that empowerment to really supercharge healing, the healing process, and just enjoy being alive, even in the turmoil that is our life on earth, even in that turmoil, to enjoy the miracle of being alive.
That was all so beautifully said, Richard, and resonates so much. And I hardly know where to start, but I want to say just toward the end of what you just said that I am a cycle breaker. I mean, for sure, that's something that is a part of my work. I mean that, and I mean that in multiple ways, but I agree so heartily that that is like one thing that we can do as parents is break the cycles that have caused us harm. And I mean, sometimes I think one of the things I've really had to reckon with personally is like just how long it took to see it, to change it, to make the difference. And I think like what you said about how we have to get on the other side of this disintegration in a positive way. And it's like, it's so hard to imagine that right now in multiple ways because you're talking about, the poly crisis and the crises, plural, that we're in right now. Holy crap. And it's so hard to sit here in America right now while our government's being dismantled. I just read today, like the FDA is going to stop doing food safety checks. Like we're really fucked here in America. And it's like, but we can't let ourselves think that way. Like, so every day I'm like doubling down on making sure that I am doing like the grounding things I need to do, because what we can do as individuals right now is be grounded in our nervous systems, not let what's happening around us destroy our mental health. But just doing that takes a certain amount of energy. Like I recognize the privilege I have to be able to do that. I am not like trying to work some full-time job right now too and be in this world. And so I just want to express my appreciation for you articulating all of that so beautifully, because this is where we are. Yes, disintegration isn't only at the individual level. It's fractal. It's affecting so much around us. Nature, systems, like our government right now is disintegrating in a way that is going to cause unprecedented suffering in this nation and the entire world. Something has been set in motion that is going to bring great peril to so many. And what can we do? Well, we just have to do like the little things that we can.
The work that I do has different facets to it. It's healing work, it's liberation work, so it's a form of activism, social activism, climate activism in its way. It's an art form as well. So I look at what I'm calling the deep neuroculture as an aesthetic medium itself. And I'm looking at artistic creativity because art is important. It's another thing where there's been a blind spot about the human need for art and for beauty, the art and the beauty of everyday life, even in tragedy, even in suffering. And so I'm looking at the deep neuroculture that is our collective nervous system as a species, as an artistic medium, and not just a medium for activism, but as an artistic medium. And so it's healing, it's activism, and it's art all rolled into one. And the deep neuroculture of which we're all a part, that actually is our biological, neurobiological home, you can compare the synapses in an individual nervous system to the relational spaces of the deep neuroculture, where those relational spaces are the synaptic network of our culture. And it can be liberating and delightful to recognize that. Because, for example, right this moment in the space between you and I, that's like kind of like a synapse. And in the culture, just like in an individual nervous system, there are synaptic illnesses. There are synaptic illnesses in the deep neuroculture, and we can begin to heal that in the relationships that we have between us as individuals, in our families, with our colleagues. We can do it when we go to the store with the cashier at the checkout of the supermarket, by bringing consciousness and agency to the interactions that we have with strangers. It makes a difference, you know. It makes a difference. I mean, when I go into a supermarket, a lot of times the people at the cash registers, they're treated like machines themselves. No one actually notices them as human beings. And if you do, you can tell that, because a lot of times they'll light up or they'll be a little bit flustered or confused if you locate the person inside and contact them. This kind of relationality doesn't have to be limited to psychotherapy, to a psychotherapeutic dyad in an office for a 50-minute hour. You know, it can be a way of life, you know, and we can transform the culture from the ground up with this transformed and empowered and liberated sense of relationality, where it's not just breaking the cycle, it's lifting it up to a whole other level. And if this infuses the lives of people in the helping professions, if it infuses the lives of activists who are so often prone to heartache and burnout, and infuse the lives of artists. I'm in Los Angeles, so it's like the incubation space of much of the culture, for better and worse. And if you look at you can get a kind of an inside look looking at the new Seth Rogen series, The Studio. It's pretty hilarious and pretty insightful and real. But there's a lot of people who came here to create, and to create things from their heart. And they're met with toxic enculturation very often. Very often they hit the wall and run into these situations with people who are creating toxic culture, just to, put it simply. And these are all challenges that people are encountering with the ambitendencies of the deep neuroculture, the dynamisms or lack of dynamisms of the deep neuroculture. And by engaging these larger currents, it can empower us as individuals as we ourselves go through a positive disintegration. And there's a recursive flow between the process of disintegration species-wide and with us as individuals. And the sooner we recognize that, the sooner we'll be better off as individuals, third factor individuals in particular, and engaging the third factor of the deep neuroculture that we're immersed in, that makes all the difference in our lives. And so this is the heart of my work. And so I work with people in the helping professions, with activists and with artists. And not only that, but parents and elders, grandparents, have an enormous role to play in the up-leveling of the process of positive disintegration species-wide, and doing everything that they can. A lot of them already are, and not understanding it from a theoretical perspective, doing what they can from their heart to see that there's a positive outcome.
I just want to take a pause to sort of draw out the links with the theory. So when you're talking about enculturation, we're really talking about a form of socialization.
Yes.
If you're reading a theory. So when we're talking about, we've got two different things going on insofar as we've got competing interests around the environment. That's where we come into the space of ambivalence and ambitendencies, because while one part of society might be acting towards positive climate change, there's obviously a commercial interest maybe working towards negative. And if we think about humanity as a whole, and envisage that as a person, that's where we can draw the connections with theory. So in a way, us as individuals, we become the expression of satisfaction. We actually act like the dynamisms almost within a society, because it starts with our values and our behaviors and our relationships, but then we become the expression of satisfaction. We become the expression of guilt and of shame. We give voice to those things in a social context, and we really stop to think how polar that can be to the socialization. So when you were talking about like creative people coming to LA, the thing that I thought of was a lot of people are coming with the intent to be authentically expressive, in their creativity, and yet you fall into almost a commodification machine, which then makes a lot of people, I guess, who are maybe in, movies or doing whatever they're doing, to be subconscious of their appearance and to present themselves in a certain way, which maybe isn't authentic. And that all then comes back to, in theory, looking at our values and our behaviors and saying, is what we're actually doing really aligned with what we truly believe? Right. And then letting that flow out, and to throw a few cliches out, think globally, act locally. So you're acting within self and then trying to permeate that change out, or, be change you want to see. Like, we, at some level, know these things about theory, but it starts within looking at our behaviors and going, does this actually really align with my value and what I want out of life? Am I then spreading that out into my immediate relationships? How does this fit into a global context? So I think it's helpful for people, when we're talking about all of this stuff, to think of us as, yes, one mushroom connected person as a whole of humanity, and then think about how we behave within that context.
Oh, Emma, I so appreciate you putting it in those terms. That's really clarifying. I didn't know if I was just like in the weeds with a jumble of different theories, but you made it sound so clear.
That's my job here. No, but this is part of the change that I want to see in the world. Is I really believe in this theory, and I believe a lot of the things that you've been talking about, particularly around climate. Especially, I live under the ozone hole, and we either flood or burn every single year here. So that's quite important to me. But I think that when we talk about the synapse between two people, and part of that is communication. So, like, part of my hope in my behavior is to make that communication so clear that hopefully a message is sent that perhaps pushes or passes on that essence of change. So I think maybe that's why I do it, which is all related to what we've been talking about today.
And the more liberated we become from the toxic enculturation that we've absorbed, the more we can seize the opportunity of the relational space between us and recognize what a great opportunity it is as an art form, and approach it as artists, regardless of what else that we do in life, whether we're a parent, whether we're a gas station attendant. It doesn't matter. We can all do this. This is the deep neuroculture is the home that we live in, whether we recognize it or not. And it lives in the spaces between us. And those spaces are aesthetic mediums. They're playgrounds where we can join together and co-create beauty. And we can co-create, especially with, you were talking, Chris, resonant attunement, which interpersonal neurobiology provides such a rich understanding of it. We can engage resonant attunement to turn the spaces, transform the spaces between us into places of beauty, where our entire somatic experience, not just our eyes, but our entire sensorium, our entire somatic experience is just vibrating with the beauty that we release and create just from the back and forth of the flow of energy between us that creates this vibrating field. It just seems that that's our birthright, as our spiritual birthright as human beings. But we have been missing the opportunity for so long, so many of us, and have closed the door on that possibility. But it's there right now, every moment, 24/7.
I feel so inspired at this point, and I'm thinking about, I had to make some notes to myself just so I wouldn't lose these threads, but I'm thinking that I guess one way to look at what we're going through right now, globally even, is that when we're living through this kind of intense disintegration, it has the potential to activate dynamisms at the individual and beyond level, just because it wakes people up to their own hierarchy of values and they say, oh, wow, I don't want to contribute to this. I want to change. And right there, that is someone who has now discovered this hierarchy of values. I mean, I love that you're giving us an opportunity to bring these concepts to life. And I'm thinking about positive maladjustment. This is a time for us to stand up for what's right when we live in a society where values have become so horizontal, and well, we have to do something. We have to stand up for what's right in whatever ways we can. I've just have really had this realization lately that when we first started this podcast, I don't think I could have realized how important it was for people to hear our voice, and that it's that the resonance that comes through in our voice, not only the conversations that we're having and the topics that we're discussing, but us as people are broadcasting or transmitting out not only this message, but it's more than that. It's really like this special thing that I didn't know when we first started doing this. And that's part of why I want to do more podcasting, because I just get that one of the contributions I can make personally is to have this kind of discussion and bring something into the world. It's like an act of creation that we're doing together right now. It's just like there's so many layers to all of this that it's kind of endless and deep. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Absolutely. I remember when you first started the podcast mentioning to you the aesthetic quality of your own actual voice. Your voice has an aesthetic quality. It does. And so that's the thing of the poetry of everyday life, where if we can resonate with it, if we notice it, there it is, and sometimes we have to, like, as in terms of the positive disintegration, we have to awaken to that in ways that we might have been numb to before. Another thing that I want to speak to has to do with the third factor, and the third factor itself as a concept relating to other frameworks outside Dąbrowski, and what we can discover by doing a deeper dive into what the heck is the third factor. How is that possible? How can there be one? How can we even understand how it came to be? And so I think part of the answer comes from an understanding of chaos theory. So in chaos theory, there's a phenomenon called an attractor, and that draws something to it. And one of the metaphors that's used is if you take a marble and put it in a bowl, it'll spin crazily around the bowl in an unpredictable way, kind of like a chaotic way, but it always ends up where it's going to end up. All right. And with weather patterns, you really can't predict the weather so well. Chaos is part of the weather pattern, but it's always going to tend towards certain equilibria and end up in a certain direction. And so you have climate. And so in any kind of natural phenomena, you have an element of chaos, but you also have an element of order and attractors that draw things. And so in a human life, you have this third factor that propels a person into a positive disintegration, right? And so the third factor person themselves is a kind of attractor, and the field of third factor, the network of third factor people, even if they don't know they're third factor people or know that they're part of an unconscious network of such people, can be understood as evolutionary avatars. If you plug the theory of positive disintegration into the extended evolutionary synthesis, you can see this. And so that kind of makes the third factor even more exciting than it was before, because they can be understood, taking it out of just the individual, putting it into the relationality of the relationships that third factor people are immersed in, and then even up-leveling it from that into the neural ecology of which we're all a part, that deep neuroculture. That third factor people can be understood as a kind of harbinger or avatar of consciousness evolution, and not just consciousness, but relational evolution, the evolution of how we relate to one another and how we co-create the ecology of which we're a part into this new emergent thing that has to happen if we're going to survive as a species. I mean, it's not like there's a choice. It has to happen. And so this to me makes it exciting and opens the box of the third factor, kind of like a magic box, into all kind of wonderful things that we can discover inside this closed box of the third factor. What really is it?
I'm going to put a link in the show notes to a retrieval I put on the Dąbrowski Center website about the third factor for people who want to read about how Dąbrowski conceived of it. But I just wanted to say briefly, Richard, that well, how do we identify these people? They're the people who have strong developmental potential in the Dąbrowskian sense. And so they have strong overexcitabilities, and they also have evidence of dynamisms, even if it's only the nuclei of multi-levelness. And like a child, it's still there. And so learning to identify these people and support their development is what Dąbrowski and mental hygiene is all about. I agree with you so much that the evolutionary potential demands it at this point.
Can I jump in for a moment with my light bulb, which has been picking at me since from what you said, Chris, about resonance with other people and the podcast speaking to people, and then also what we were just talking about with the third factor. It strikes me that this is a thing that comes up for me at work a lot, where I'm lucky to work in a project space where that's just the way things are is a dirty phrase. Because we're like, I don't know, we don't just accept the status quo. We always look for improvement opportunities and stuff. But that's a kind of unique environment, right? Most of the time when we're out walking around in the world, there's a lot of shit that we just accept. Oh, this is the way things are. It won't change. And I think, and that's a enculturation, socialization thing. I think the way to wake up that third factor within people, because a lot of people will have repressed it so hard because they want to connect with other people. So we've got that, that perpetual marketing problem of people trying to fit in, right? Just so they can have some form of connection. But the way that we tear all of that open and actually make our connections more authentic and more genuine and then see change in the world is by going out there saying, let's just question that whole, this is the way things are, and go and do something scary and go and do something brave and go and voice an opinion that's unpopular and show other people that, oh, maybe it doesn't have to be this way just because it's always been this way. It's like that whole parenting breaking the cycle thing. Someone's got to go out there and do it and show other people that, oh shit, it's okay to not like the way my parents parented me. It's okay to go out spaces and express my queerness. It's okay to go out in spaces and push back on aspects of society. And the more that people will do that, the more it opens the gates for other people to go, you know what, shit, I'm sitting in this space where I actually don't like the environment that I'm in, but I feel so much pressure to conform just so I can have those relationships that I've never been brave enough to do that. And I think that's that first step is some of us have to go out there like those avatars that you were talking about, Richard, and just like throw ourselves completely out there to give license to other people to share stories, make change, be different, open up to new possibilities.
Absolutely. And there's one thing that you said there that I think can ignite so much, and that's the word bravery. So the two of you have actually been quite brave in doing what you've done and, embodied some courage. And I know from Chris, from your life story that you've shared, there's a vein of courage that runs through it. And so many third factor people, just by what they run up against, can lose heart. They can lose heart. I think most of us probably have at a certain point lost heart, even if only momentarily. And the root word of courage is the same thing as heart, as core, heart in Latin. And so heart and courage, being disheartened, and having courage are very much related. And so I think it's very important in dealing with third factor people and the third factor process and the culture at large to revive the human heart, this heart of courage and third factor courage It's not an easy thing to do in our own lives, if you've ever contended with this, to be in a state of courage, to live in courage, to restore yourself from a state of being disheartened. But we need to do it for each other, and we can do it all the time in the seemingly most prosaic situations where we can give heart to other people. The U.S. Surgeon General has spoken about the loneliness epidemic and the health consequences of loneliness, which also is something that interpersonal neurobiology speaks to. But if you flip that loneliness epidemic on its head, it's an epidemic of people not proactively taking heart and up-leveling their relationality with the people closest to them. And this is something that we all have the opportunity to do, to demonstrate as best we can, because, we're all limited, but as best we can, the bravery that Emma was speaking to. So I think that's an important thing, and that courage has got to be part of the third factor, as well as a kind of audacity. The rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel talked about spiritual audacity, and I think that that's an important part of living the life of the third factor, especially if it's tempered with humility. But courage, humility, audacity, these are virtues that will serve us well.
If you are feeling a little bit scared, think about the what ought to be, the what could be, the what's possible. And think of also the detriment of stagnating and being stuck in the one spot, of not being your authentic self and having all these relationships around you that are built on false pretenses. You don't know whether or not people actually love you for who you are, and you're going to be forever lonely. Think about, what happens if we don't do something about the climate. Think about what happens if we don't be nice to other people. Think about what happens if you go to LA and you get sucked into the modification machine and you never get to express that creative idea that you had in the first place. What sort of miserable, fucked up life are you going to end up with if you don't take the brave step and make a change? And what wonderful, awesome things are possible if you just put yourself out there, take that leap, and have a better heart.
Preach, Emma. True words.
I just wanted to name, with toxic enculturation, one aspect of that I feel like related to that is overcoming internalized ableism, which is one of the ways that this theory has been so helpful to me personally, and moving away from pathologizing these aspects of myself. And that's just another thing right now. We're in our society, we're hearing messaging from people now in the federal government, talking about being autistic as if it's a disease. And just, it's like what we're going through right now as a society. We have to work extra hard to embrace neurodiversity, affirming ways of being. And that's just, another liberation.
Absolutely.
I feel like this has been an amazing, perfect conversation. I knew that you would be a great guest. This is exactly this zoomed out perspective is what we've desperately needed. And I just don't know how to thank you, Richard.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Emma. I do have a website, livingartswisdom.com, and people can contact me at richard@livingartswisdom.com.
Thank you so much.
That was a great conversation, and it's good to kind of zoom out on the theory, not just so that we can have additional context and stuff to then reapply to our own transformation, but also see the broader applicability of how this theory works. This applies to everybody, as long as we've got the courage to do that. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Chris. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. It is always a pleasure.
And thank you, listeners. We always appreciate you. We appreciate you as part of our system, Interconnected. Continue your path to authenticity through the links in the show notes. Subscribe to our Substack newsletter for stacks of cool things delivered straight to your inbox. Explore the Dąbrowski Centre, email us, or join us on social media. And don't forget to show your love by liking, subscribing, grabbing some positive Disintegration merch, or leaving us a rating or review on your podcast platform.